The dust of the airstrip rose in lazy, tan plumes, clinging to everything with a gritty persistence. It settled on the razor wire, the sandbagged emplacements, and the tired faces of the men who watched the transport plane taxi to a halt. When she stepped out, she was a study in civilian anonymity. Khaki cargo pants, a plain gray shirt, and hair pulled back in a simple, no-nonsense knot. She carried a single duffel bag, its weight pulling one shoulder slightly lower than the other. No one offered to help. She was just another contractor, another piece of administrative baggage delivered to the hot, beating heart of nowhere. Her name was Alara Vance, but the name meant nothing here. The Marines of Forward Operating Base Kestrel gave her a passing glance, their eyes cataloging her, older than most, not in uniform, irrelevant, before dismissing her entirely. They turned back to their duties, the metallic clang of maintenance and the shouted jargon of drills reclaiming the air. Alara's gaze swept over the base once, a calm, comprehensive scan that took in a layout, the defensive positions, the angles of the sun. It was an assessment made from a lifetime of such arrivals, a silent calculation of geography and threat. She adjusted the strap of her bag and began walking toward the hulking shape of Hangar 4, her steps even and unhurried. The heat was a physical weight, but she moved through it as if it were a cool spring morning. She did not sweat. She did not squint against the glare. She simply moved, a gray shape against a brown world, her presence already fading into the background, just as she preferred. The men she passed saw a woman who did not belong, a bureaucratic error sent to the wrong address. They saw soft edges where they valued hardness, silence where they expected deference or nervous chatter. What they failed to see was the stillness in her core, a placid lake beneath which a leviathan slept. She knew this dismissal. It was an old, familiar cloak, and she wore it as comfortably as her worn leather boots. It was useful. It kept her hidden in plain sight. Inside Hangar 4, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and old oil. It housed a ghost, a relic the younger pilots and crews openly mocked. The Archangel, a full-motion simulator for an aircraft that had been retired from active service for nearly a decade. Yet, it was kept running for reasons only the highest echelons of command understood, a piece of legacy tech that refused to die. Alara stopped before it, her shadow stretching long in the dim light. To the others, it was a fossil. To her, it was an old friend. "You, Vance?" The voice was sharp, impatient. Colonel Madsen stood with his arms crossed, his uniform starched into rigid planes. He was a man carved from regulations, his authority absolute within the confines of this dusty kingdom. He looked Alara up and down, his expression a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "I was expecting a team. They sent one woman." Alara met his gaze without flinching. "I'm enough." Her voice was low, calm, carrying no trace of defiance or apology. It was a simple statement of fact. Madsen snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You're the tech specialist for the Archangel? That heap of junk should have been melted down for scrap metal years ago. My men have real-world threats to train for, not joyrides in a museum piece." He gestured vaguely toward the simulator, his contempt clear. "Whatever it is you're here to do, just stay out of the way. We run a tight operation. No room for civilian distractions." The insult was meant to land, to put her in her place. He saw a pencil pusher, someone who understood schematics, but not sacrifice. He could not comprehend the landscape of scars, both seen and unseen, that she carried. He could not imagine the weight of the ghosts who walked beside her, whispering call signs he would never be cleared to know. "I understand, Colonel," she said, the words smooth, offering no friction. She turned her attention back to the Archangel, her posture indicating the conversation was over. Madsen bristled at the silent dismissal. He was the commander of this base, a man whose orders were obeyed without question. But this woman, with her quiet stillness and unnerving calm, seemed to operate under a different set of rules altogether. He watched her for a moment longer, then turned on his heel and strode out of the hangar, leaving her alone with the machine. His institutional arrogance filled the space he left behind, a thick, suffocating presence. He had made his judgment. She was insignificant, a problem to be managed until she was gone. He could not have been more wrong. The true distraction had just arrived, but the disruption would not be the one he expected. Alara set her duffel bag down by the simulator's main console. She didn't open it. She walked the perimeter of the machine, a slow, deliberate circuit. The Archangel was a beast of antiquated technology, a tangle of hydraulic lines, thick bundles of wiring, and cathode ray tube displays that hummed with a low, mournful energy. Her fingers traced a seam in the metal skin of the cockpit module, a light touch, like greeting an old warhorse. She knew its every groan, its every shudder. She had been one of its first pilots, back when it was a top-secret prototype, and she was someone else entirely. Her gaze drifted to her own wrist, where a small, faded tattoo was partially hidden by the cuff of her shirt. It was a cluster of 5 faint stars forming a constellation that didn't exist in any official star chart. To most, it was a meaningless smudge of ink, a youthful mistake. To the few who knew, it was the sigil of a ghost unit, a team that officially never was. A team that took on the missions no one else could, and whose members were expected to be erased from memory. She was the last of them. From a catwalk above, she watched a squad of Force Recon Marines cycle through a combat scenario. They were young, strong, and brimming with the aggressive confidence of their elite training. Their leader, a sergeant named Decker with a jaw like a block of granite, barked orders into his headset. They were attempting a high-risk, low-altitude infiltration in harsh weather conditions. The Archangel bucked and roared, simulating the turbulence. Inside the cockpit, the team failed. Again, Decker slammed his fist against the console. "Reset it," he yelled to the operator. Alara watched his frustration, his reliance on brute force over finesse. He was trying to command the storm, not fly through it. She saw their tactical errors, the minute hesitations, the wasted movements. They were treating the simulation as a video game to be beaten, not a life to be preserved. They lacked patience. They lacked harmony with the machine. When they emerged, drenched in sweat and cursing, their eyes fell on her. The quiet woman, standing alone, observing. Their failure was raw, and her silent presence felt like a judgment. She had said nothing, done nothing. Yet to them, she was an unwelcome witness to their inadequacy. She knew that look. It was the precursor to hostility, the lashing out of a wounded ego. The fourth failure broke something in them. The simulation ended with a screech of simulated tearing metal and a flashing red screen that read, "Mission failure. Catastrophic hull breach." Sergeant Decker threw his helmet against the wall. His team, a tight-knit group of 4 other Marines, mirrored his anger. They stomped out of the cockpit module, their energy toxic. They saw Alara, still standing by the console, her expression unreadable. To them, she was the focal point of their humiliation. Decker stalked toward her, his squad fanning out behind him, cutting off any retreat. "Got something to say, lady?" he growled. "Enjoying the show?" Alara remained silent, her eyes calm. She was not afraid. She was assessing. 5 hostiles, all peak physical specimens, closing in a half circle. Their movements were aggressive but sloppy, fueled by emotion. "What's a civilian doing in here anyway?" Another Marine sneered. "This is a restricted area," Decker smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. He was looking for a target, and she was it. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial drawl, "we have strict safety protocols in here. That old machine has a lot of exposed hydraulics. Can't have any loose clothing getting caught." He gestured to her baggy cargo pants. "For your own safety, you're going to have to take those off." It was a crude power play, a classic hazing tactic designed to degrade and dominate. It was not a real order. It was an assertion of power, a way to put the civilian in her place. The other Marines chuckled, their posture shifting as they closed the distance. They expected fear, tears, a panicked retreat. They expected her to shrink. They saw an old woman, a soft target, an easy victim for their misplaced rage. The air grew thick with their collective menace. The low hum of the Archangel was the only other sound, a deep thrumming that felt like a hell breath. Alara didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched them come, her mind a placid surface, calculating the precise moment the first one would cross the line from threat to action. The pressure in the hangar was no longer simulated. It was real, and it was aimed directly at her. Decker took the final step, his hand reaching for her. That was the mistake. The moment his fingers brushed the fabric of her shirt, the world shifted on its axis. Alara moved, not with the explosive power of a brawler, but with the fluid, undeniable efficiency of water flowing around stone. Her left hand came up, not to block his arm, but to gently cup his wrist. Her thumb found a nerve cluster just below the bone. She pressed. A white-hot jolt of agony shot up Decker's arm, and his legs buckled. He went down with a choked gasp, his entire arm numb and useless. He was neutralized before he even understood what had happened. Before the second Marine could process his leader's collapse, Alara was already in motion. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, a seamless rotation that brought her inside his reach. His punch, aimed at her head, sailed over her shoulder. Her right hand, fingers held stiffly, jabbed into the side of his neck, striking the vagus nerve. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the floor in a boneless heap. 2 down. The remaining 3 stared in stunned disbelief. Their cocky smirks had vanished, replaced by shock and a flicker of fear. One charged, a roar of fury tearing from his throat. Alara sidestepped his clumsy bull rush, her foot hooking behind his ankle. Using his own forward momentum against him, she sent him sprawling face first onto the concrete floor. The third takedown was a symphony of redirected force. The fourth Marine threw a wild haymaker. She swayed back just enough for the fist to miss, then flowed forward, her palm striking the point of his elbow, hyperextending the joint. He screamed, clutching his arm, stumbling away. The last one, seeing his entire squad dismantled in seconds, hesitated. That hesitation was all Alara needed. She closed the distance in a single, gliding step. A precise strike to his solar plexus drove the air from his lungs in a silent, desperate whoosh. He folded like a piece of paper. It was over. 5 Elite Force Recon Marines, neutralized in less than a minute. She hadn't thrown a single punch. She hadn't broken a sweat. There was no wasted motion, no flourish, no anger. It was a simple, quiet disassembly of a threat. She stood for a moment in the sudden silence, the only one standing amidst the groaning bodies. Then, she calmly smoothed the front of her gray shirt, turned her back on the wreckage of their arrogance, and walked back to the Archangel's console. She sat down and began tapping at the keyboard, her focus already shifted back to the machine, as if nothing had happened at all. News of the incident in Hangar 4 traveled faster than a radio transmission. It became the stuff of instant legend, whispered in chow lines and maintenance bays. At first, no one believed it. One civilian woman taking down 5 Force Recon Marines? It was absurd. Then the security footage surfaced. Colonel Madsen watched it in his office, his face a mask of cold fury that slowly melted into stunned disbelief. The video was clear, undeniable. There was no brawl. It was a clinical, almost surgical application of force. Her movements were economical, precise, and devastatingly effective. She moved like a ghost. There was no aggression in her actions, only a calm, decisive response to a direct threat. Madsen watched it 3 times, each viewing deepening the mystery of the woman he had so easily dismissed. He saw the way she used their own momentum against them, the way she targeted nerve clusters and joint locks instead of throwing wild punches. This was not self-defense learned in a weekend seminar. This was the work of a master. The perception of Alara Vance shifted overnight. The dismissive glances were replaced by looks of awe, curiosity, and a healthy dose of fear. The soldiers who had seen her as an irrelevant, aging contractor now gave her a wide berth, their eyes filled with a new, grudging respect. They started calling her the Hangar 4 Ghost. Among the older NCOs, a different kind of memory was stirring. A master gunnery sergeant, a man who had seen 3 decades of service in places that didn't appear on maps, watched the footage with a thoughtful frown. Her movements were familiar, a fluid and brutally efficient style he hadn't seen in 20 years. It was a style taught in only one program, a program that was spoken of only in hushed, fearful tones, a program that didn't officially exist. Nix, the master gunnery sergeant, muttered to himself, the name tasting like ash and forgotten secrets in his mouth. He remembered the stories, the legends of an operator who could walk through walls, a phantom who completed impossible missions and left no trace. An operator whose call sign was Nyx, the Greek goddess of the night. He looked across the base, toward the hangar where the quiet woman worked on the old machine. It couldn't be. Nyx was a myth, a ghost story told to scare new recruits. Wasn't she? A few days later, a real-world crisis erupted. A high-altitude reconnaissance drone, a predator carrying a payload of highly sensitive intelligence-gathering equipment, went dark. It was flying a critical pattern over hostile territory, mapping insurgent positions. One moment, it was transmitting perfectly. The next, its data link was severed. The drone's operators in the command center scrambled, their faces pale with panic. They tried every standard protocol, every backup system. Nothing. The drone was now flying blind, on a pre-programmed course that would eventually take it beyond friendly airspace and, if not recovered, into enemy hands. The loss of the drone would be a disaster. The loss of the intel it carried would be catastrophic. Colonel Madsen stood behind the frantic operators, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a chair. The lead engineer reported that the drone's primary guidance system had failed, and the fail-safes weren't kicking in. The problem, he explained, was that the drone was an older model, retrofitted with new tech. Its core operating system was based on a legacy platform, an archaic coding language that none of the younger technicians had been trained on. It was an obsolete system, the same obsolete system that formed the bedrock of the Archangel simulator. Madsen's mind raced. He remembered the tech specialist he had dismissed, the woman who was here to work on that very system. Swallowing his pride was a bitter pill, but the alternative was unthinkable. "Gimme Vance," he commanded, his voice tight. Now 2 soldiers sprinted to Hangar 4. They found Ilera calmly calibrating the Archangel's motion sensors. They relayed the colonel's summons. She simply nodded, wiped her hands on a rag, and followed them. She walked into the tense, chaotic command center, a pocket of calm in a sea of anxiety. Madsen didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The Predator's guidance is non-responsive," he said, pointing to a screen showing the drone's last known location. "The system is based on the Archangel's architecture. Can you do anything?" Ilera looked at the screens, absorbing the data. She didn't answer immediately. She walked to an unused communications terminal, sat down, and her fingers began to move across the keyboard. She ignored the modern graphical interface, pulling up a raw command prompt. A simple black screen with a blinking green cursor. Her fingers flew, typing in lines of code that no one else in the room recognized. It was a dead language she spoke with perfect fluency. She wasn't trying to re-establish the primary link. She was bypassing it entirely, routing a signal through an old, decommissioned military satellite, a ghost in the sky that only she seemed to know was still there. Minutes passed in agonizing silence, broken only by the soft, rhythmic clicking of the keyboard. Then, a single line of text appeared on her screen. "Link established." On the main monitor, the drone's icon blinked back to life. A collective gasp went through the room. Ilera typed a few more commands, stabilizing the connection and transferring control back to the stunned operators. She had saved the mission, the drone, and the priceless intel it carried. She stood up, her work done. "The link is stable," she said quietly, "but the primary guidance processor is fried. Get it home," without waiting for a response. She turned and walked out of the command center, leaving a room full of soldiers staring after her in utter, reverent silence. Colonel Madsen returned to his office, his mind reeling. The woman was not a technician. Technicians fix things. She had performed a miracle. The incident in the hangar could have been explained away as a fluke, A case of a few arrogant Marines underestimating a woman with some self-defense training. But this was different. This was a level of expertise that didn't exist in the civilian world. He sat at his terminal and pulled up the personnel file for Alara Vance. It was exactly as he remembered. Thin, unremarkable. Civilian contractor, GS, 14 pay grade, technical advisor for legacy aviation systems. It was a perfect cover. Using his highest command level clearance, he initiated a deep-level background inquiry, overriding the standard security locks. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered, and a new file loaded. It was almost entirely black. Page after page of solid black rectangles, entire paragraphs and histories redacted by an authority far above his own. But there were a few things left visible. At the top of the file, a single line of text glowed, operator designation, NYX. Below it, another line, unit, classified, eyes only, status, ghost protocol, active. He scrolled down, his breath catching in his throat. He saw commendations for actions and conflicts he had only read about in classified briefings. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, and others awards so secret he didn't even recognize the insignia. The commendations were signed by names that were legends, generals who had shaped the modern military from the shadows. The file listed her proficiencies: expert in all known forms of armed and unarmed combat, master interrogator, expert in signals intelligence and technical exploitation, Halo qualified, combat diver, master linguist. The list went on and on. It was the resume of a ghost, a phantom warrior, the kind of operative countries officially denied they had. He finally understood. She wasn't here to fix the Archangel simulator. The simulator was her cover story, a plausible reason to place one of the most dangerous and capable operatives on the planet at his remote, dusty base. He didn't know what her real mission was, and he realized with a chilling certainty that he was never meant to. He was just a gatekeeper, and he had tried to turn away the queen. He leaned back in his chair, the sterile light of the monitor illuminating his pale face. The dismissive, arrogant colonel was gone, replaced by a soldier who had just come face-to-face with a living legend. He finally knew who Alara Vance was, or rather, who she wasn't. The next morning, the sun rose with its usual unforgiving intensity. Alara emerged from her small quarters and began her walk to Hangar 4 to finish her diagnostics on the Archangel. She expected the day to be like any other since the incident, the quiet stairs, the wide berths given by soldiers. But today was different. As she approached the hangar, she saw them. The entire platoon of Force Recon Marines, including Sergeant Decker and the 4 men she had so effortlessly dismantled, were standing in perfect formation just outside the hangar doors. They were freshly showered, their uniforms immaculate. They weren't blocking her path. They were waiting. As she drew near, Decker, his arm in a sling but his eyes clear and respectful, saw her. He didn't speak to her. He turned to his men. "Platoon, 10 Hut," he barked. The men snapped to perfect, rigid attention. Their movements were sharp, unified, a silent testament. Then, Colonel Madsen stepped out from beside the hangar door. He, too, was in his dress uniform. He faced Alara, his expression cleared of all its earlier arrogance. In its place was a profound, solemn respect. He did not speak. He did not offer an apology or an explanation. Words were insufficient now. He simply raised his hand to his brow and rendered a slow, perfect salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a superior officer. It was the salute of one warrior acknowledging another, a sign of ultimate respect that transcended rank and uniform. The air was still. The entire base seemed to hold its breath. Alara stopped. She looked at the colonel, then her eyes swept over the faces of the young Marines standing at attention. She saw in their eyes that they finally understood, not the details of her past, but the truth of her strength. She held their gaze for a long moment, a silent exchange passing between them. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a gesture of forgiveness. It was one of acknowledgement. And with that, she turned and walked past the formation, past the saluting colonel, and into the cool, dark sanctuary of the hangar, the great doors sliding shut behind her. Inside, the silence was a welcome embrace. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the Archangel's power systems, a mechanical heartbeat that she found more comforting than any human voice. Dust motes, disturbed by her entrance, danced like tiny stars in the shafts of sunlight piercing the gloom from the high windows. Her work here was finished. The simulator was more than fixed. She had calibrated it to a level of precision it hadn't known since its creation. It was ready. For what? She did not know. Her mission here had never been about the machine. It had been about being in place, a silent sentinel waiting for a signal that might never come. She walked to the cockpit and placed her palm flat against its cold metal skin one last time. It was a farewell. Her gaze was distant, looking not at the wires and gauges before her, but through them into a past filled with the faces of her true comrades, the other stars in her forgotten constellation. The small tattoo on her wrist seemed to absorb the faint light, a secret kept for decades. The institutional arrogance had been broken, replaced by a quiet, earned reverence. She had not sought it, but she had commanded it through action alone. The base had been changed. The men who had underestimated her would carry the lesson for the rest of their careers. They had learned that strength was not always loud, that competence did not require validation, and that legends sometimes walked among them in plain clothes. Alara picked up her duffel bag. It was as light as it had been upon her arrival. She carried no more than she needed. She walked toward the hangar's side exit, her footsteps making no sound on the dusty concrete floor. She slipped out into the blinding sun, a ghost departing as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind nothing but the low, steady hum of the machine and a silence filled with unspoken respect.